Number 1. The Man. I have to let you know what kind of family I grew up in. My parents got divorced when I was really young, and us 3 kids ended up living with our mom. We lived in an area where there was a lot of poverty and not a whole lot of jobs. While we were younger, we had to live on welfare because my mom had to be home taking care of us until my older brother was old enough to begin babysitting us. Only then was my mom able to get a job, and the one she got was a waitress in a bar. Because of this, she worked nights, and she worked late, so we were always home alone at nighttime. We were fortunate throughout most of our young lives that although we were on welfare, a family member had a really old house that they let us live in without paying rent. We had electricity and well water, but no other utilities. Our house was heated by a coal stove, and we definitely did not have a telephone. My mom was lucky to have an old car that she drove to work, and all of our food was bought on food stamps until she began working. The house that we lived in was a house set in a shallow holler down off of an old dirt road. There were no outside lights around, other than the one we had on our porch, so it was always really dark outside. The only nighttime light came from the moon, and that wasn't always full, so it wasn't always that helpful. I was always scared to be outside at nighttime. Occasionally, though, my brother would send me outside to fill up the coal bucket. Whenever he did, I was terrified. I had to turn my back to the hill, and I always imagined some crazy psycho who lived out in the hills coming down off the hill and attacking me or something. I always got the coal bucket full, and then I would run back to the front door without looking behind me. I always thought that, while I was doing this, someone was running behind me and trying to catch me. I would get inside the house as quickly as I could and close the door and lock it. My older brother would often tease me about being scared. However, I often pointed out, if he was not scared of the dark, why did he never go outside after the sun went down to get the coal? He always sent me, and I was 2 years younger than he was. Anyway, this went on for a while. When I was 12 years old, on a pretty cool autumn night, my brother sent me out to get the coal. As I mentioned, it was on the side of the house, and I went out to collect it. Like usual, I was wary of someone coming down on the hill at me. But when I turned to return, I faced the front yard and driveway. I was about to run like I always did, but I stopped when I noticed something that I didn't expect. There was someone standing at the end of our driveway, and he seemed to be watching me. Our driveway was pretty long, maybe about 10 car lengths long is the best way that I could describe it, so the guy wasn't very close to me. I also couldn't really see him that well, but none of that mattered because I didn't know who he was, and I had no idea why he was standing outside of our front yard like that, watching me. After getting over the initial shock of seeing the guy, I changed my routine, and I walked, very slowly, over to the porch, and then over to the door to enter the house. I also kept looking back over my shoulder to see what the guy was doing. He hadn't moved. He kept standing in his place and kept watching me. I got into the house and closed and locked the door. My brother and sister were in the living room, and I put the coal bucket down. I told my brother to go to the door and look out of one of the small windows in the door. "What the hell?" I remember him saying as he looked out the front door. "Who is that?" I told him that I had no idea who it was, but he was just standing out there, watching me as I was getting the coal. My brother replied that he wasn't standing out there anymore. He was slowly walking up the driveway. I looked out of the window and noticed that he was right. The man was walking toward the house, very slowly. He was dragging one of his feet while he walked, which made us think there was something wrong with the guy. We didn't know what to do other than watch him. We turned the porch light off, thinking that doing so might deter him. I'm not sure why we thought that. It of course didn't work at all. He just kept slowly walking up to the house. The guy made it slowly up to our front porch, and he awkwardly made it up the stairs. Then suddenly, it seemed like he disappeared. We had been watching through the window in the door. To get a better look, I went over to the regular window, which had its curtains closed. As I drew back the curtains, I got the fright of my life. The man was looking directly at me when I opened the curtains, and he was wearing some sort of nasty, disgusting mask too. I mean, it looked like it was made from real skin or something, but I could tell that it was a mask and not his real face. I screamed and ran back from the curtains. After I screamed, the man began pounding on the window. He also began making some strange wailing noise. Put together with his hideous appearance, we were scared out of our wits, or at least my sister and I were. I thought my brother was too, as he ran out of the room. However, my brother came back in the room with our mom's rifle. At first I was shocked because we were forbidden to even touch the gun. In normal conditions, my brother would have gotten his butt beaten with a switch for laying his hand on it. I mean, he had used it before, but only for target practicing or going hunting with my mom. But I realized that it was a scary and unusual situation, and that he wanted to protect us. He scared us further when he opened the front door and let himself out. He immediately began yelling at the man, telling him to get the hell off of our porch. The man kept pounding on the window, seemingly ignoring my brother. My brother fired the rifle, and I immediately thought that he had shot the man. I would learn later that he simply fired a warning shot. If you had known my brother, either before or after this happened, you would not have been surprised if he had shot the man. That was when the pounding stopped. I guess the guy retreated off the porch, but I was too scared to look outside to know for sure. It was only about 5 minutes later, when my brother came back into the house, that I realized what had happened. The man had been scared that he would be shot, my brother told me, and he left off the porch, moving a bit faster than he had before. He ran off into the hills, though, not back to the road. My brother waited a little bit of extra time to make sure he was gone. We didn't know who the man was or what he wanted, but I was glad that my brother was there in order to protect us that night. But telling us that he ran off into the hills didn't help me a whole lot in the future. It just made it scarier whenever I was out after dark, wondering if he would come out of the hills to come back and get me. Number 2. The bar. I used to work in a bar that served a small, rural community. The bar itself was a really old building that was outside of the neighborhood. Other than the bar and a little country store, there were no other businesses for at least a half an hour drive. So a lot of the people in the neighborhood would spend time at the bar. This was in the mid-1980s. We would occasionally have fights break out in the bar. That was nothing too unusual. Fortunately, the guys fighting would always take it outside, so I didn't have to deal with it. So those altercations never really bothered me much. It was actually a pretty peaceful job, and I nearly always enjoyed the shifts that I worked there. As it was a really small bar and a really small community, I was normally the only person who was ever there. The only other person who ever worked was the owner, and he would only be in earlier in the day. At nighttime, it was almost always just me. So one night, when I was working late, there were not a lot of other people who were in the bar. The door opened, and in walked in someone that I had never seen before in my life. I knew everyone in the community. It was pretty small, like I said, but it wasn't unusual to get someone unknown every now and then. It was likely just someone who was driving through the area. But there was something off about this guy. It wasn't really that cool outside, but he was wearing a trench coat, a scarf around part of his face, and a fedora hat that he wore low, obscuring part of his face. I could barely see any of his face, and the dark lighting of the bar didn't help. The man came up to the bar. He ordered a drink. I can't recall what drink it was. He then paid for it and went over to a table. He sat at the table and then slowly drank his drink. I mean, it was really slow. He nursed the drink for a very long time. Since it was late at night, little by little, the few patrons who were in the bar began leaving. It wasn't very long until the only two people left in the bar were me and the man at the table. We still had time before we would close, though, so I wasn't going to ask him to leave or anything. However, I began to feel uncomfortable with being alone with him in the bar because he was giving me the creeps. To continue giving me the creeps, in addition to still slowly nursing the one drink that he had ordered a long time before, he took the bowl of peanuts at his table and began flicking them around the room. It was bizarre to see and made me very uncomfortable, but I didn't want to confront him really because I was in the bar by myself. Many people would crack open the peanuts and just throw the shells on the floor anyway, so I figured that I would just clean it up when he eventually left. However, being that I was at the bar and he was still the only person in the bar, it was hard not to pay attention to how he was behaving. Everything got really weird, however, when I noticed him rummaging inside of his trench coat. He reached in and took something out of it. I wasn't able to tell what it was at first until he took off his hat and pulled it over his head. That was when I realized what it was. Of course, it was a mask, and I began to get a little worried. The man had done a lot to hide his face when he had come into the bar, and now he was making sure that I couldn't identify him at all. The man got up and began walking up to the bar. I wasn't sure what to do. There was a gun that was kept under the bar, but I had never had to use it for anything. I'd never had to grab it before, and it didn't occur to me to try and grab it then. I just watched as the man walked slowly up to the bar until he was standing and looking me in the eyes. I asked him if he wanted another drink, not knowing what else to do. After a brief moment of silence, he grabbed a huge knife out of his trench coat. He took the knife and thrust it downward quickly and forcibly, burying the tip of it into the bar. I reacted not by grabbing the gun, but by running quickly to the door that led to the small stockroom of the bar. I locked the door, hoping that it was heavy enough that the guy couldn't get through it. I'm not sure how long I stayed in there before I eventually came out. I peeked out and didn't see the guy. However, there were a couple strange things that I noticed. He never removed the knife from the bar. It was still stuck there. Plus nothing was missing. He had not robbed us of any money or booze, but he was definitely gone. So I have no idea to this day what the guy wanted. I have no idea who he was or what he wanted. He was by far, though, the creepiest guy that had ever come into that bar in the entire time that I worked there. My boss thought it might have been someone trying to send him a message. He did have his enemies, but he never told me much more than that. Number 3, the fire. My boyfriend and I used to go camping all the time. He was very experienced as a camper and was great at finding beautiful and secluded places for us to camp. We would hike out into the countryside and not see any other people for days and days. I never really asked him if we were supposed to be camping in these areas because I was pretty confident that the answer would be no. Still, nothing weird ever happened to us for the longest time. However, one fall, which was our favorite time to go camping, I had a pretty scary experience. It was very beautiful out that week that we went camping. We followed the small river for most of the time, putting up camp several places along it. That way, my boyfriend could go fishing and catch our dinner every day. We both loved fish, so that worked out pretty well. We had been out for at least 4 days by that point, if I am remembering correctly. While we ate dinner, we also had some wine that I'd been carrying with me to drink one of the nights. My boyfriend could never hold his wine very well, and he had to go to bed long before I got tired. I decided to remain up by the fire for a while and just relax. It was so nice and peaceful outside that I just wanted to enjoy the quiet. Well, if you'd ever been out in the quiet of the forest for a very long time, you know how it can affect what you are hearing. You get habituated to the sounds of nature, so anything out of the ordinary immediately becomes concerning to you. The first time I heard something that caught my attention, it was just something simple as a stick breaking, but it alarmed me, and I kept listening to hear anything else. There were a few other weird noises out in the woods that caught my attention. I called out a few times, thinking that there might be someone else out there. If there was, it was likely that they would either smell the fire or see the light from it, so I didn't feel like I had to warn them that my boyfriend and I were there. But I wanted to know if someone else was out there, and was hoping that someone would respond if there had been. No one ever responded. After a while, I finally put out the fire and went into the tent in order to go to bed. I got woke up because there was some light that shined in my eyes. First I thought that it was morning, and I was wondering why I still felt so tired. However, when I opened my eyes, I realized that it wasn't light outside. It was still nighttime. Looking toward the front of the tent, I noticed that the fire was burning in front of the tent. I was sure that I had put it out though, but my mind was pretty muddled, so I thought I would just go outside and make sure the fire was out. But when I opened the tent and looked at the fire, I saw someone sitting on the other side of the fire from the tent. I couldn't make out any features though, because the flames were just too bright. But there was no doubt that there was someone sitting in front of that fire looking at our tent. They must have restarted the fire, because at that point I was fully aware that I had indeed put the fire out. I went back into the tent to wake my boyfriend up. I shook him a lot and told him that someone had restarted our fire and was outside watching our tent. He grabbed the hatchet that we used to cut wood and immediately went out of the tent. After a moment he ducked back in and told me that no one was out there, but I insisted that I had put out the fire and I had seen the person out there. He decided to take a flashlight and go looking to see if there was anyone around. I was pretty scared while he was gone. I had the fillet knife that I used to prepare the fish with me in my hand the entire time. Every time I heard a noise, I thought that the man had come back while my boyfriend was gone. I had never been so scared in my entire life. I guess my boyfriend knew that I would think it was the guy coming back into the camp if he hadn't called out that it was him. When he came back into the tent, he told me that he had searched around and was unable to find anyone. He didn't doubt that I had seen someone, and I knew that I did, but the guy was nowhere to be found. I didn't sleep well that night, or any of the other nights that we were out there. It was just a really creepy thing to have seen, and I will never forget it. Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. As usual, I want to thank all my paid Patreon members, starting with my two VIPs, Chiamerah Cat and Pixie Hopper 8. I also want to thank Heidi H, Chronic J, Stinky News, EricaOdd, Tracy Sellars, Kelli Clark, and Broken Angel. If you haven't already after listening to this video, you can always go to the Patreon page, and there is a new story that is exclusively there for my paid Patreon members. However, I do have the written version of the story posted too, and any Patreon members could read that. So please make sure not to miss that. This is a true story that happened to me and my sister about 6 weeks ago, I think. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please hit the subscribe button and the bell so you'll be notified of new material. Leave me a comment, which I'll do my best to get back to, and consider sharing the video with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have an original story you want narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please send it to the address included in the description. I have to mention that I will only read original stories. I have been receiving a lot of subscriber stories in my email, but they're also CC'd to many other narrators too. I can't check every single other narrator to know if they've done these stories or not, so I can't really read those stories because I have no way of knowing if they'll be original to my channel or not. And that's pretty much what I've been trying to do here, is just read original content for the most part. And now I'd like to thank all my free Patreon members: Anthony Bowers, Remi, Venikins, Rose Metro, Woofer McWooferson, Cindy Cleveland, Vanapira Rayne, William H, Alien Unicorn 13, Kathryn Lynch, The Bama Guy 334, Michael Vasquez, Bonnie Lynn, Collet Bond, Krista Pike, Prince UVA, HF Creations, Bonnie Gibbs, Linda Moore, DJ Lira, Evil Black Cat, Lori Hicks, Lisa Herman, and Krystal Robin. But most importantly, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.